All right, class, we have now reached chapter 3 of the book of Daniel. And let's look at verses 1 through 3. Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold, the height of which was 60 cubits, and its width 6 cubits. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king sent word to assemble the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the rulers of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. Then the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the rulers of the provinces were assembled for the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. And they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. The image is identified as the head of gold is Nebuchadnezzar, caused an image of gold to be erected in his image. The image was an awesome sight because of its height. It was 60 cubits, which is 90 feet high, and because of the gold. Then Nebuchadnezzar summoned 8 classes of officials to the dedication of the image. Here we look at the first one, satraps. They were the chief representatives of the king. The prefects, military commanders. Governors were civil administrators. The advisors were counselors to those in governmental authority. Treasurers were administrators of the funds of the kingdom. Judges were administrators of the law. Magistrates passed judgment in keeping the law, and the rulers of the provinces were subordinates of the satraps. We read verse 4. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, "To you the command is given, O peoples, nations, and men of every language, that at the moment you hear the sound of the horn, flute, lyre, trigon, psaltery, bagpipe, and all kinds of music, you're to fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king has set up. But whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into the midst of a furnace of blazing fire." Therefore, at that time, when all the peoples heard the sound of the horn, flute, lyre, trigon, psaltery, bagpipe, and all kinds of music, all the peoples, nations, and men of every language fell down and worshipped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. Look at the bullets underneath. When all the officials were assembled, the king's herald announced that everyone in the kingdom were to recognize Nebuchadnezzar's political and religious power. Failure to comply to the command to worship the image was penalized by sudden death. Overwhelmed by the king's command, the awesomeness of the image, the sound of the music, the assembled officials fell down and worshiped the image of gold. In this way, the officials and the people they represented recognized the political and religious authority of Nebuchadnezzar. Let's read verses 8 through 12. For this reason, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and brought charges against the Jews. They responded and said to Nebuchadnezzar the king, "O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the horn, flute, lyre, lute, trigon, psaltery, bagpipe, and all kinds of music is to fall down and worship the golden image. But whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into the midst of a furnace of blazing fire. There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the administration of the province of Babylon, namely Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-nego. These men, O king, have disregarded you. They do not serve your gods and worship the golden image which you have set up." Look at the bullets. Some court advisors were quick to bring an accusation against the Jews. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-nego. The accusers were suddenly motivated by jealousy, for they referred to the fact that Nebuchadnezzar had set those Jews over the affairs of the province of Babylon. Moreover, the accusers were evidently seeking favor from the king by contrasting the three Jews' refusal to bow to the image with their own worship of it. Interestingly, they accused Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-nego, but not Daniel, who probably held a higher administrative position. But here we see in verses 13 through 18 the faith of the accused. Let's read. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in rage and anger, gave orders to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-nego. Then these men were brought before the king. Nebuchadnezzar responded and said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-nego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up? Now, if you are ready, at the moment you hear the sound of the horn, flute, lyre, trigon, psaltery, and bagpipe, and all kinds of music, to fall down and worship the image that I have made, very well. But if you do not worship, you will immediately be cast into the midst of a furnace of blazing fire. And what God is there who can deliver you out of my hands?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-nego replied to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to give you an answer concerning this matter. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the furnace of blazing fire, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But even if he does not, let it be known to you, O king, that we are not going to serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up." When Nebuchadnezzar heard that the three refused to bow, he became furious with rage. The kings asked if the accusation against them was true, and gave them another opportunity to bow before the king. By doing so, they could prove the falsehood of the accusation. However, their God had forbidden them to worship any other gods. We know that from the first commandment of the 10 Commandments. That's the first one. Obeying Jehovah was more important than life or death, so they refused to worship the image the king made. We see verse 19 through 21, the record of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-nego being thrown into the fiery furnace. Let's read it. Then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with wrath, and his facial expression was altered toward Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-nego. He answered by giving orders to heat the furnace 7 times more than it was usually heated. He commanded certain valiant warriors who were in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-nego in order to cast them into the furnace of blazing fire. Then these men were tied up in their trousers, their coats, their caps, and their other clothes, and were cast into the midst of the furnace of blazing fire. Nebuchadnezzar, in a fit of anger, had the furnace heated, we see, 7 times hotter than usual. We see the first bullet. The second one says the king ordered some of his valiant soldiers to tie up the 3 and throw them into the furnace. And third bullet says his company to remove the clothing of those being executed. But because of the haste in which the king wanted the command carried out, this practice was not followed this time. Look at verses 22 through and 25. For this reason, because the king's command was urgent, and the furnace had been extremely hot, the flame of the fire slew those men who carried up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-nego. But these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-nego, fell into the midst of the furnace of blazing fire, still tied up. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astounded and stood up in haste. He said to his high officials, "Was it not 3 men we cast bound into the midst of the fire?" They replied to the king, "Certainly, O king." He said, "Look, I see 4 men loosed and walking about in the midst of the fire without harm. And the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods." Let's look at the bullets. The flames leaping through the opening of the furnace killed the men who had thrown the 3 Jews into the fire. However, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-nego fell into the midst of the blazing furnace, still tied up. Nebuchadnezzar was watching the proceedings from a safe distance. As he peered into the furnace, what he saw amazed him. The 3 men who had been tied up were walking around in the furnace, unbound and unharmed. Instead of seeing 3 men in the furnace, he saw 4. Nebuchadnezzar said the 4th is like a son of the gods. Let's read verses 26 and 27. Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door of the furnace of blazing fire. He responded and said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-nego, come out, you servants of the Most High God, and come here. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-nego came out of the midst of the fire. The satraps, the prefects, the governors, and the king's high officials gathered around and saw in regard to these men that the fire had no effect on the bodies of these men, nor was the head of their hair singed, nor were their trousers damaged, nor had the smell of fire even come upon them. Let's read the bullets. Then Nebuchadnezzar approached as near as he dared to the opening of the furnace, so that his command could be heard. Come out, you servants of the Most High God. Therefore the king recognized that the God of these 3 faithfully served is truly God. This was a remarkable admission by Nebuchadnezzar. Up to then he had believed that his Babylonian gods were superior to Yahweh. After all, he had taken captives from Judah and vessels from the Jews' temple. Though the king recognized the unusual nature of Yahweh, he did not acknowledge him as his God. And here we see a decree. Let's read verses 28 through 30. Nebuchadnezzar responded and said, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-nego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants who put their trust in him, violating the king's command and yielded up their bodies so as not to serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make a decree that any people, nation, or tongue that speaks anything offensive against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-nego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses reduced to a rubbish heap, inasmuch as there is no other God who is able to deliver in this way. Then the king caused Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-nego to prosper in the province of Babylon. And let's read the bullets. In view of the evidence, Nebuchadnezzar declared that this was an act of the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-nego, who had sent his angel to rescue the 3 who served this God. The king was moved by the devotion of these 3 Jews to their God. As a result, the king decreed that the God of the 3 young Jews was to be held in honor, and that anyone who dishonored this God would lose his life. Moreover, the king promoted the 3 Jews to positions of greater honor and power in the kingdom. And I believe that is the end of this